Welcome. Once again, thank you so much for joining and giving us the opportunity to enjoy your book, Jackie.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
No problem. I'm going to start by just reading a short introduction. Um, Jackie Bennett is an adventurer both in journeys of the spirit and in the world of financial strategy. Raised in South Africa, she is qualified in business studies, which has enabled her to help numerous businesses achieve their strategies and financial goals. However, Jackie has always pursued a parallel interest in spirituality, guiding her into her writing, speaking, and workshop facilitating career. Inspired by her discoveries on her journey, Jackie has created a successful platform called the Dare to Be Loved Journey. Here, she shares her inspirational insights gifted to her from universal wisdom through her writing, speaking, and poetry. In addition, Jackie shares her personal stories of trauma and healing from depression, PTSD, suicide ideation, anxiety, chronic fibromyalgia, and migraines. Jackie has many passions. A passion for awakening the spiritual revolutionary within others is the most prominent of these. Jackie hosts workshops to guide others to meet their spiritual and to meet their spirit and teach them how to integrate their individual spirits into their body, minds, and soul healing processes, connecting them to universal wisdom to self heal. As an impassioned student of life, Jackie continues to practice and promote living a spirit led life of courage, kindness, compassion, and love. Jackie has a Bachelor's of Commerce degrees in Industrial Psychology and Economics from the University of South Africa and an MBA from the University of Witwatersrand, including a semester abroad at Rotterdam School of Management. Ramos. In addition, Jackie is a certified integral coach through New Ventures West and trained as a yoga teacher with Yoga Tree, acquiring both certifications. In her memoir, Life's Not Yoga, or Is It? Is Jackie's first published book. That's a beautiful introduction. Thank you so much, Jackie, for sending that to me.
Thank you so much for the introduction. I appreciate it.
No problem. So, we're going to start off by actually having Jackie read the prologue in the book and the poem that's actually, I think, the very first poem in the book, too, as well. And it to be enjoyable to our listening pleasures.
And whilst this is a memoir, and I know you're going to ask me about the title, the title of the book is Aurobindo said all life is yoga. And when we go through chaos, we don't really understand what that means. So my prologue is I'm 46 and I'm up in the mountains in Colorado, and that's really setting the scene for what's going on here. And I'm obviously depressed and I'm confused. There are 1,000 ways you can stare up There are 1,000 ways you can stay up at a snow-capped peak, but there's only one way that you can lie up there, dead in the ice. The mountains aren't here for our enjoyment. They are sublime, and I'm a dead woman walking through the snow, trying and failing to touch that otherworldly power. I'm standing 11,000 feet above the world and staring down at the wreckage of my life. I came into this life as a stranger, and now, after 8 near-death experiences and 15 years of marriage, I am leaving as a stranger. My husband does not know me, and I do not want to know myself. I avert my eyes from what lies inside, the way one looks away from a mangled body at the scene of a car accident. I want to keep speeding down the highway and put it all out of my mind, but I can't do that anymore. It's screaming to be let in. It's hammering on the windows and smashing through the doors to be let in, to be let out. I am frozen, and the wind tugs at my clothing. If I stayed here and did not move, at last, I would die. Now I know why I traveled over 15,000 kilometers to get to these mountains in Colorado. I'm running away from the person I have become. I have been trapped inside someone else's idea of myself, which bears no relation to the truth of who I am, and I ache for someone to tell me what to do. I ache for someone to explain to me how I became like this. The snow keeps falling, and I am alone. And then the opening poem, which I dedicate to my father, is really about seeing that our reflections, the things we don't like in others, are the gifts for us to learn about ourselves. So for my father, my imperfections are my beauty spots along life's mirrored wall. I wear their scars externally so you can see them all. My shame, my guilt, my blame, my doubt, my inner critic's plea, the freedom from their sight and sound, projection's gift to be. I know now that your mirror's truth reflects the perfect me. Uncomplicated for its grace, my heart gives thanks to thee.
Wow. Thank you very much. I think that deserves a round of applause. That's beautiful. A part of me was thinking actually while you were reading, I somewhat wished you actually read the book yourself and like the audiobook. I know the reader did an amazing job, but I was just like, oh, I wish you'd read it herself. That would have been beautiful.
Well, I see that I think it's Leanne said she wished that I had narrated the book. She loves my accent. You know, it was such a difficult decision for me because, and this is really the essence of why I decided not to do it. There were two key reasons. Is I tried to read it and it was just too emotionally hard for me. There were just times where having to relive scenes were just not possible. And so I decided to put it out to a couple of companies that do audiobooks and listen to, you know, actresses who were going to do the reading. And then I realized that I didn't have 3 to 4 years to go to college to get their skills. I could never have given justice to the characters, and watching the process that I had to go to brief this audio company, Pro Audio Voices, and then, you know, give them reference to the characters that I wanted them to bring life to in a way that was authentic, or the way that respected and honored my parents, or respected and honored the characters in the book. And the amount of work that they went through, I would just never have been able to do it with that amount of professionalism, that amount of skill. And certainly I would have just blubbered and cried the whole way through, so nobody would have heard anything. So yeah, thank you very much, Leanne, but I hope you understand. I gather you listened to the audiobook, and what was so amazing is the woman, Sarah Doss, who did the reading, the day that I got to meet her. So I have a young girl, who she's now a young woman in South Africa, who I was part of raising. Her name is Sihle Mbalawa. And the day that Sierra Doss came onto the screen, she looks just like her. And the day that I got to meet her and I'd heard her voice and fallen in love with her voice, after listening to multiple actresses, both British, South African, and American. And then this woman arrived on screen. I was like, everything made sense to me. And she's from Chicago.
Oh, well, that's beautiful. Yeah, I think you pretty every enunciation and everything is just beautiful. Like it's just amazing to listen to.
Thank you. Yeah.
All right, so Jackie, we have a few questions here, and some members attending today also have some questions too, because your book was so interesting. There were so many times I really wanted to pick something to whack Michael or Dan in the head, but I was just going like, this is a book, so I have to come back and just not be that person. But if you wouldn't mind, we would actually, for the sake of time, just start going through each of the questions one at a
Yes,
time. Yes.
please do.
And you've also had an opportunity to see most of the questions posted too on the Facebook platform. So the very first question here, because it's one of the things that I was curious about when I actually saw the title of your book, was how did you come up with that title? Were there other titles that you had to just you surveyed other title before you eventually settled for this one, or it just came to you?
So it was interesting because the original title of my book was called I Dared to Ask, because my whole call to action for my online material is dare to be love. And it's how to find the essence of love in every challenging situation that we have. So if you look at the subtitle, it's finding love in the chaos of life. And we're not talking about romantic love. We're talking about, love for whatever is. How do we surrender to present moment awareness and actually be okay with what has happened? And what I tried to do in my book was show you my chaos, be completely exposed about my mess, and even drag you through my misery, particularly Yara. I'm in my mid-40s, my marriage is falling apart. I'm having this relationship that I think is there to be the answer, and it's not. Until I realized that even though I'd gone within many times, that was really where the solution was. And when I, sort of tested, because I worked with professionals, even though I chose to publish myself, when I tested the title, it didn't test very well. So I went back and I looked at, well, what is the bigger message that I'm trying to do here? Was talk about finding love in our chaos or in our difficult situations, and heal from physical and mental, challenges that we have, and overcome trauma. And then I worked with a team, and we went through the book, and we eventually had about 100 titles that we were trying to choose from. And there's a part in the book where I say life's not effing yoga, and it kept coming back as it was going to be a difficult title on some level for people to resonate with, but it always raises the question, why did I choose that title? Which I love, because I said everyone's going to ask why, and that's what's happened in every interview that I've had or every reading that I've had. And the thing is that going back to Urubundu is all life is yoga, as he said. So I'm really putting the question, life's not yoga, or is it? And then sort of helping the reader understand that once, even though I had gone through chaos, some that I started manifesting and bringing towards myself, but my childhood chaos, was I responsible for that or not? Well, until we learn to stop the chaos ourselves, then we understand what it means to be on our mat when we actually look at how we are responding to a pose or how we are responding to our breath. So that's really why I chose that title in the end, because it brings about this conversation.
That's beautiful too. Maureen has a question here, and she said, I found large portion of the book, especially the first third, to be chaotic and confusing. I wonder if you wrote it that way intentionally. If it was intentional, was that for an emotional reason? Example, your life felt chaotic and confusing, or your memories of those times just lack details, or more practical reason, example, to protect others' identities.
So Maureen, thank you for all your questions. And I loved seeing the questions because it really got me thinking about a lot of stuff and why this work matters so much to me, beyond just writing a memoir, which is the Dare to Be Loved journey and helping people meet their spirit beyond body, mind, and soul, and the workshops that I run. So what actually happened was when I first wrote the book, it was about 550 pages, and this is my fifth manuscript. So, that fifth time round, I think the first time I wrote it was just to for my own healing purposes. And then I realized, what does the audience actually have capacity for? And that my story was not as important as the work, and bringing that all together. And what happened is initially, I think we cut section one down, part one down by about half, because people started getting what they call sympathy fatigue when they read. I had so much chaos in my childhood that eventually people had to put the book down because it was too traumatic for them. So to answer your question, it was chaotic. There's only so much chaos that apparently a reader can tolerate. So that's also why we, kept it short and kept it so that you kept turning the pages. That was, also a lot of work to do to get it. So it was very intentional in the end. It was not necessarily for emotional readers. It was actually for the reader's emotional capacity to absorb chaos, which was very interesting, which I never, I felt quite guilty cutting back because I kept thinking, well, if I don't tell the reader everything, I felt like I was lying. And as I worked with my editors, they were saying, well, the reader's not ever going to know anything anyway, and they're going to take from it what they want. and understanding that process as a first-time author. So yes, it was intentional, but for the motion of the reader's capacity, and also to, to keep the chaos. I mean, by the time you get to the end of part one, most people are like sitting back and going like, wow. And then I show you how all of that impacted on me 20 years later. And then, some people found part two, some people love part one, then they say, no, they love part two. You can't keep all the readers happy. But really in part two, I'm showing you my inner dialogue. I'm dragging you through my misery, and I never forget Seekle saying to me, Mom, I wanted to smack you, like you were irritating me. It was so obvious where this was going. And that was part of, we all go through that with some of our challenges in our life. So that's why part two, you have more of that experience. I don't know if that answers your question, but not to protect other people's identities. I think just to give enough for the reader to understand how not working through it or not really understanding my trauma, how it was impacting me now in my mid-40s.
Yeah, that definitely answers my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. So there was some resemblance when I was reading your book as to when I read Cicely Tyson, Just as I Am. And the resemblance actually comes from the fact that she actually elaborated what her spiritual practices were. And so it actually puzzled me a little bit because at some point I had to keep your book and go back and make sure that I was referencing her right and had to reread those sections in her book because she has times where she prays, times where she meditates, and she literally said she doesn't find any conflicting, she doesn't feel conflicted in any way doing any of them because there's a center circumference for which she meets, and that is love, which I think it's kind of like the archetypal of your book too as well. So I actually drafted out a question just wanting to figure out what is your daily spiritual practice. Do you still read your Bible as well as other religious books in practice? I read Cicely Tyson's book, Just as I Am, and in her book, she explained how she incorporates multiple practices and find enrichment doing so. She prays, meditates, studies her Bible at the same time. Do you have a similar practice?
So yes, I do have similar practices, and it's interesting because recently I got quite a bad review on Goodreads because the person felt I hadn't shared enough of that, about the yogic journey. Well, the yogic journey is just breath and life from my perspective. And one of the reasons is for the work that I do and the courses that I run, I wanted to just write the memoir because originally the book was more like her book where it was about my journey and then, the solutions. We chose after I had a actually award-winning author in America, and she's a critic for the Boston Globe, say to me, split the books and give and put the memoir out first so that people know who you are, that there's, you have been able to expose all of yourself, and then keep the other work separate because some people might not want to read the book, and it's more about the work that they can do for themselves. So yes, I do have practices where I like to meditate in the morning, and that's where I believe I connect with my spirit, and that's where I listen to God or universal wisdom or universal spirit, however you'd like to refer to it. And then in the evenings, I like to pray. And my prayers from my spiritual practices were the first place that I start is giving thanks for myself, for where I pitched up in the day, for myself or others, and acknowledging where my spirit was present or looking at where it wasn't, where I might have behaved in a manner that I'm less proud of. And, even though I have practices, I still mess up. And I remember my mum saying to me, Jacqueline, because they still call me Jacqueline, how do you get it right? You used to be so angry and now you're so calm and whatever. I said, Mum, I mess it up 100 times a day still, even if it's in my head, where I want to say to someone, how dare you do that? Or how dare you speak to me that way, or want to get frustrated at someone who's driving on the road and not necessarily being gracious on the road. So to me, even that is a spiritual practice. So it's not just about the books that I read, and I try and feed myself with a lot of spiritual information, from A Course in Miracles to reading the Bible. I've even, to the Quran, to the Kabbalah, to reading all of this material, because, and if you're interested, is to go to, there's a YouTube talk that I did, is Why We Need a Spiritual Revolution. Because for me, the original source teachings all come from one. I talk about, that universal wisdom speaks through me. So then I surrender in that particular presentation to what is being fed through me to feed to people. Like, I don't know if you know Abraham Hicks or, Esther Hicks in terms of that kind of work. And really how the mystics, the psychologies, the philosophies, and the religions all come from one source teaching. And how we as personalities have over-identified in soul, mind, and body, and what's happened over 20,000 years, and how we've got it confused in our ego-based world that we live in at the moment, which we've been educated to be good academically or be good on the sports field, very mind, body, and very little work in terms of soul, and then almost nothing in terms of really understanding how our spirit is separate from our soul. And I'm talking about our individual spirit. And that's why my workshops are where you can meet your spirit so that you can then see body, mind, soul, spirit, and gain access to universal wisdom to be able to deal with any chaotic or challenge that you have in life. And then the workshops that follow on from that. But yes, prayer, meditation, reading, and then even sometimes a spiritual practice can be is if I'm feeling a little ungrounded, it can be using a red traffic light as an opportunity to regroup with spirit. And I can even use that for breath, and as opposed to being frustrated at the traffic light, as an opportunity, as a practice to breathe and come back. So I have a lot of them, and I try to use every moment in life as a spiritual practice.
Great. Terry, do you still want to ask your question? I actually sent you a message.
Yes, please. Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Nice meeting you, Jackie, I guess. So I was taken, it's funny you say you like the first, the second, or the third. I was really enmeshed in the trauma from your childhood, probably because I had a similar experience. But anyway, that's irrelevant. But I wonder, there was a quote, and I was going to grab it before, but I didn't want to stop listening to you about how faith is, the way you defined faith. Faith is not about believing in what you are doing. It is when you have no doubt. That was in your book. And so I think of that, and I wonder, given your arc on growing, being in apartheid South Africa as a white woman and seeing the way your nanny was treated and the way others were treated, and then feeling all the different ups and flows, and then looking at, it's not just America either, the world, in a way there is so much tribalism, and apartheid was tribalism, right? So your thoughts on getting people to have faith and love instead of our differences. And I think that's kind of like what I got out of your book was love is God. God is love. God isn't Abraham or Jesus or whomever your God, your particular Bible says he is, or she is, or it is, whatever. And from your perspective and your learnings, how do we get people to stop being so tribalistic? It's been forever, as long as humans have been around, but it's become so, at least in America, politically, it's become like politics is faith now instead of.
Yeah, so the thing is, as I said, and if you watch that YouTube video of why we need a spiritual revolution, and I'm launching a podcast soon called Finding Love in the Chaos of Life, where we talk about these conversations all the time, and anyone's welcome to come as a guest with questions. So it'll be launching in about 4 weeks' time. So please, look out for that. But what is actually happening, and this is coming to me now for you, is, and in the work that I do, is we are operating in this resistance with each other on such a low level as human beings, in body and mind. And then we're taking a belief that we've embedded into our DNA and we're just responding. So Viktor Frankl, if you've read Man's Search for Meaning, talks about purpose in life and that moment that we have between stimulus and response. That we are so overstimulated, and we've got all this information coming at us, social media and stuff, and everybody, between stimulus and response, there's nothing. And so we can't actually look at our belief. We have no capacity to look at our belief. So we look at anyone who would be bringing on genocide or world wars or wars in Russia. these people are operating very much only in body. They're not even aware of their mind narrative or their soul in terms of how their soul is coming to the world, with zero connection with your spirit. So when we operate, so have you ever just lashed out at someone? And afterwards gone, why did I do that? Okay, so you're then operating in that same lower level where you can create war. If you can reflect on yourself later, then you are going to the space where your spirit is bringing into your soul the essence of knowing better in the mind, and then you can unpack it. As I say, if you do the workshop, meet your spirit, it's 90 minutes. It's very quick. You meet your spirit, and everyone, I mean, for me, it's such an honor when I'm in a room with people and I've got 15 people who meet their spirit and they go, aha, it's so simple. But how do we stay connected? So we all have a moment of enlightenment that we've achieved. And so what I teach in my workshops is to be able to take the story where you have found enlightenment and use that as your toolbox over and over again. And in that talk that I do, Why We Need a Spiritual Revolution, and that's only 30 minutes, I talk about how I managed to manifest, so commuter taxis are everyone's complaint in South Africa, and how I actually could manifest them out my life. But the true miracle came is when I could bring the chaos back into my life and see them again and manifest life every moment, love every moment. But when we don't have a connection with spirit, it's impossible. And I'm talking about our individual spirit separate from, because to be able to truly connect with God or connect with universal wisdom, we need to have access to our spirit. But we're not educated as to how to be there because we've grown up in an ego time of body, mind, and even over soul identity. And if you do look at that talk, Why We Need a Spiritual Revolution, you'll see the timeline of 20,000 years of, it took 20,000 years approximately for over-identification of soul. And then at the time of the Industrial Revolution, about 400 years, we went from Industrial Revolution to about the 1960s of over-identification with mind. And then just, as short as 60 years of over-identification of body. And now we're having a spiritual crisis actually in the world. And COVID was our gift. And I talk about that, which we messed up completely. It took 60 years. And now we're at a time where the spirit is screaming out. And so everyone wants to be spiritually connected. And we even have people that are over-identifying as a spiritual teacher. Whereas we are all the same, we are all identical. I mess it up 100 times a day. I'm just a conduit for the message. I don't really like to use the word teacher, but that's how people refer to me. I teach the message of love as a result of my life experiences in terms of what comes through me. So, it's more practical. And what's nice is what I love is, and what has been asked of me is to give it to the world in a very easy paint by numbers thing. So it's not esoteric, it's not hard to reach. You meet your spirit in that moment, you go, oh, wow, this is so easy. But then how to stay connected with your spirit is the challenge. Because, if you run a marathon, your body's used to it. It's to create then the practices and the disciplines, which is very much, I'm very pro silent meditation, not guided meditation, to stay connected with your spirit, and then to work with it daily to scrape through the layers of the challenges and ourselves. So I hope that answers your question. What is my advice for the world? Let's all meet our spirit. And because it's impossible to fight. And you cannot fight with someone when you're in spirit. When your spirit is integrated in your mind, body, and soul, and you connect it to universal wisdom, it is impossible. And I'll never forget when I came back from America 4 years ago. And I had to come back. I couldn't get permanent residence there at the time. And so I thought I'm going to come back to South Africa. And there's a young chap who has been in my life for, 25 years. And I always say our first meeting was on a paint tin. He was sitting on a paint tin and I was sitting in a paint tin in a shack in a township. And I asked him to imagine having his own car one day. And he was a young man who had crossed my life. And I just loved this individual, the essence of who he was. And I talk about in my book of how I was just so disassociated, I didn't see color. My ex-husband used to say to me, oh, who was that woman you were talking to? And I'd say, who? He'd say, with the blonde hair. And I go, I don't know what you're talking about. Or the tall woman or the fat woman. I was so disassociated, but it kept me in spirit. So that was my gift. Coming into my body in my 40s was traumatic for me, even realizing I was a woman because I had a very genderless identity. So, and I talk about that very briefly in my book, but what happened is, I remember when I came back, Sibu, he's Zulu, and he came up to me and he said to me, is that black soul still inside there? He was so worried that I might have been tainted when I was in America. But when we're in spirit, we don't see color. We only meet the spirit of the other being. So when we are in spirit, as we pitch up, that's all we see. We don't see color. We don't see identity around these narcissistic, crazy, egotistical thoughts that we have. So that was in some way, my trauma gifted me that. But then having to come into body in my 40s was traumatic for me. You know, I remember my therapist saying to me, sit in front of a mirror. I had to sit naked and look at myself and go, arms, boobs, you know, I'm a woman. I didn't wear makeup. I used to hide my physical identity. But that was the gift for the work that I do, was all of that trauma, was to be able to help people get through it and share that. So that's it. In spirit, when we are connected with our spirit, none of that becomes relevant. It just fades. It becomes irrelevant. And you just meet the other human being. You cannot put a gun to someone, even if you are in the military and you've been asked to do it. You can't when you're in spirit. So I talk about courage versus bravery, because if you've got to follow in the military, you've got to be brave. You have to put your spirit aside and say, I will be brave and do that. But courage is when you're connected with your spirit. You'll say no. So you go to Gandhi, you know, the path of no resistance. That's where true courage comes from. And that's what we can wish for the world and teach the world and share with the world. But when we're in spirit, we then start to inspire others, because they look at you from a different perspective. They go, well, you pitching up differently. And that was, somebody asked me about my mom. It was Maureen. What was interesting for me is I kept trying to push who I was onto my parents. And the moment I stopped and was just love, there was enough space for my mom to come to me. And that's how we healed my second book I'd love is to, you know, write is called My Mother's Voice, and healing, the subtitle would be Healing the Combined Wound. Because we both, you know, we had a wound that we were pressing on each other, her silence and me wanting to be heard. And then, you know, my father and me actually becoming as angry as my father. So that's it, is when I surrendered to who I was, when I surrendered to love, there was enough space for my mother to come to me. And then I realized she was always love.
Great, Jackie. Thank you for such an
Yes.
amazing answer. I just want to open it up to all the members attending today, just in case any of them have a question that they would love to ask. If you have a question for Jackie, if you just unmute yourself.
I see this here tonight. Sorry, I got to say hi. Hey, sweetie. Sorry.
Hi. No, you're fine. If you have a question, you can just unmute yourself and ask.
Hi, Jackie. I don't really have a question, but I opened your book and I saw what I kind of lived through being South African. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's just taken me back so many years. It was wonderful to read the Afrikaans words in there. It, you know, brought home back to me. I loved your book. I had come to America not in the same way you did, but came as, you know, having lived in South Africa, and then came to work here as a nanny, and then eventually stayed, met my husband, and living in America. So it was nice to see and read about your transition in doing that. But I enjoyed your book. It was wonderful.
Thank you, Zelda. And that's, you know, very special hearing it from a South African. Yeah, means a lot to me. And thank you for sharing. And I hope that you're happy in America and that life is good.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I've been married 25 years with 2 children.
Fantastic.
Well, 27 years, actually. One's graduated and working at Hopkins, and the other one's graduating in art education in May. So I'm looking at retirement soon.
Oh, okay. Wow, fantastic. Thank you for sharing. I
You're
see
welcome.
we've
There's
got
a question from Leon.
Yeah. So my Meet Your Spirit workshop is, you can do it online at home. So you can either, you know, you can, I think it's $39 that you can do it on your own. It's a pre-recorded version. I think you get 3 weeks access to sign in to do it. and you can sit at home for 90 minutes and do it. And there's very detailed instructions as to, you know, what you should make space for yourself to be able to do. So that you can do. And then also I do it once a month online. And if you go to my website, jackieburnett.com, Meet Your Spirit, you'll see that there are dates once a month. It's usually the second or, usually the third or fourth Sunday of the month. And then you can also do it one-on-one with me. And, you know, each of the workshops are priced differently. Depends whether you want to do it one-on-one with me. But if you do it at home, it's 90 minutes. If I do it with a Zoom group of 15 to 20 people, it takes close to 2.5 hours because we do questions. And then if you do it in a private session with me, you know, also, you know, 90 minutes to 2.5 hours is the time that I allow for that. See you Love that. Jack.
Yeah, I see. CC has the link copied down there. So everybody, if you want to check it out.
Yeah,
Great.
yeah. You shouldn't be promoting me.
Sorry. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Enjoying this chat. Thanks.
Thanks for being here.
So, does anyone else have any question for Jackie? We're getting closer to time. Just trying to be very mindful.
I always
here.
like to ask the question, you know, reading your book, there were, you know, your parents especially were not really painted in a good light. And to read that, you know, you came around with your mom, and I was just wondering who had, you know, who that read your book and knew you before you wrote it, you know, who had the most unusual reaction or the biggest reaction. And I guess, how did your mom respond to the book?
You know, so my mum passed away 3 January 2020, just before COVID, and she died in my arms. And I spent the last month of her life actually in the frail care center and sleeping on the floor and nurturing her in her last days, which was such an honor because I believe death is a beautiful transition. And even though, you know, we miss it, you know, spiritually, she's always with me when we connected. So what was difficult is when the family knew that the book was coming out, they tried to shut it down. They were very anti the book. And they eventually sent my mother in as the final person, because that's the way my father operated, is that she was on remote control. And actually that ended up being an opportunity for us we started therapy together. And, you know, my brothers, not my youngest brother, but my other 3 brothers, you know, and my father were very unhappy about it because they felt that they would be able to manipulate her to shut the book down. And what happened is she came and read the book in 2018, you know, the final manuscript, because originally the family said, you know, they should be able to read it and make any changes. And I said, no, this is my perspective, my story. But I did invite my mother after we'd done a few years of therapy together to read the book and to comment. And she did ask for 2 minor changes, and one happened to be the color of a carpet, because she said she didn't have such bad taste, and I didn't remember it correctly. But at the end of it, she broke down and cried, and it was so painful to watch her, because I sat and watched her read it, knowing that she was struggling with bone cancer, and it was excruciating. But at the end of it, she closed the book and she just looked at me. Well, she asked halfway, "Are you still in contact with Dan? I want to talk to Dan." I said, "No, Mom, keep reading." And then at the end of it, she closed the book and she just burst into tears. And she said, "I'm so proud of you. I'm so proud of you. And thank you for showing me what it was like for you." And then she said, "I'm so sorry." And I said, "But you don't owe me an apology." And she said, "Why not?" I said, "Because that's the essence of my book. I had to forgive myself for wanting a different experience. And now I had the perfect moment." And it was in that she realized that if someone wants to ask you for forgiveness, fine. But if they don't, you don't have to forgive them. You have to forgive yourself for wanting a different experience. And when you realize that the experience came here to gift you something, that's where the healing comes. I forgive myself for wanting a different experience, you know, which I can't remember the chapter I talk about it. And that's where the shift comes. But as soon as we want to forgive somebody else, it's just ego. It's lower level, you know, you're just operating in a lower state. That's not what Jesus was originally teaching. He said, forgive. He was carrying the cross when he said, "Do not judge." And so it's not our job to forgive someone. Forgive yourself for wanting a different experience. And that's when the gift opens, and that's when you find love. And that's when my mother could come to me, and that's when she could read my book and open to it. And the irony of it is that everyone who was very anti the book in the beginning has complimented me on it and said, we see it from your point of view. And I was true to myself. And even though it affected people, it was eventually received, and the whole family turned on me, cousins, aunts, uncles, everyone, and that's all turned around. Whether they like the book or not, or whether they agree with the book or not, it's shifted. And that was about accepting my experience, celebrating my experience, honoring my experience, and seeing it as the gift. Go.
It wasn't
I don't want to
easy.
interrupt anybody. It's okay.
I get excited,
Yeah,
sorry.
go ahead.
I'm thinking very vividly about your suicide attempts and them being whitewashed, that they didn't actually happen. When you obviously had very serious experiences. And I wondered, in your reconnection with your mom, I don't know that based on my reading of your book, I don't know that your father would have had the ability to believe anything other than where he's stuck. But in your reconnection with your mom, was she, did she acknowledge that you were suicidal, or was it we just have a difference of perception?
No, so what was interesting about that particular incident is that I brought it up in, when we were doing therapy together, and I was like, how can a mother not forget? How could a mother not forget that their daughter tried to kill themselves? I was so angry at her. And she actually went back to my dad and asked my dad. And my dad said, yes, Jacqueline, of course, Jacqueline tried to kill herself. But in that, I realized how she was dealing with her trauma as a disassociation, rewriting the script. You know how traumatized she was that she had wiped it out. But it was an opening for her to start seeing her own process. And even though I don't think she got as far along as I would have liked her to have gotten in her own process of unpacking everything, it was an opening for us. And she was like, how could I do that? But that is how she coped with trauma. And who was I to judge it other than we found this opening? We found this opening, and she had the courage to go to my father, who didn't talk to me for the last 18 years of his life and wasn't talking to me then, and take it to the man that, I remember a week before she died, I said, she always was looking for the good in him, like I was looking for in Dan and his wife and everybody else, to the cost of myself. I was playing out my mother's role. But yeah, my mother could go to my father and ask him, and my father could say, yes, it's true. And everyone else, her sisters and everyone could, but then she had to look at herself.
Yeah.
She had to go, how could I cut this out? And that was not easy for her, but very courageous of her.
And it gave you, like you said, it gave you a bridge to connect, because she had kind of disassociated from that connection. Yeah.
And it made me realize how she coped with everything else that my father did and the things that he did. But at the heart of it, she was still looking for the man that she fell in love with. And I said to her a week before she died, I said, Mommy, you fell in love. You were a 16-year-old girl. You fell in love with this man. You were always looking for that man that you fell in love with. When you die, go back, start again. Go back and be 18 again with him and tell him he mustn't stuff up this time. He's got to get it right, And she also, her children let her down. And I remember when she died, her face, she was like an 18-year-old. She passed away in my arms, and she went back to that state. And I kind of believe from my point of view and the conversations we had in those last 3 weeks before she died, was so much healing took place for her. And for an acceptance of me being able to see what she loved in my father and what she wanted from him and what she kept hoping he would come back to, and that she wouldn't abandon him because she had seen the good man that he was before he fell into significant depression and chaos.
Jackie, I've got a question. I think I asked it here on the Facebook, and I think it's beautiful that you referenced Viktor Frankl's book. It's one of the books that has actually touched me as much as Desmond Tutu's book. All of that Desmond Tutu's book, and one of my favorite of Desmond Tutu's books is God is Not a Christian. And there was a lot he said in that book where he actually referenced Gandhi and posed the question too as well. And my question to you is, what do you think is the biggest challenge people face when it comes to making positive changes in their lives?
Well, I'm actually hosting a workshop soon about why change is so hard. And the biggest challenge is that we don't have the courage to unpack our belief system, to really look at a belief. And when we are stuck in a lower state, whether it be mind, body, or soul, or all three, it's actually impossible to make a change. When we work from spirit, your change becomes fun. And that's really, my first workshop is meeting your spirit. The next one is accessing your spirit and then working with your spirit daily. So it's meditation for spiritual connection, where you then learn to access your spirit every day for 5 weeks. And then the final one is, how do you actually look at something through the lens of love, as well as the podcast that I'll be doing. We talk about that all the time. Also, if you go onto my website and you look at FAQ, there's a table that I have, which once again was gifted to me. From Universal Wisdom, which talks about the steps that we go through for change. If we cannot actually question our belief, it's impossible to make a change. So when we say, I have to lose weight, it's not going to happen. I want to lose weight, you're working from spirit. So as soon as we get stuck in the negative narrative or anything that is a capped belief, there's no hope of change. When you can take the belief, unpack it, and say, what are the alternatives? There's hope for change. So the courage to question your beliefs.
Great. And I think it's amazing that you said that, because I, for one, am someone who has sampled every religious institution, because I was brought up a Christian.
Yeah.
And when I got into the university, I actually dropped my beliefs that I actually imbibed from my parents. And that was a point where I decided to question everything. So I became an atheist for a while. And in that opportunity, I actually had the benefits of actually taking time to sample everything from a logical and a reasoning points perspective, and actually ended up back being a Christian again, which I actually personally is still a work in progress, because the hardest thing about being a Christian is being Black. And there's so many things that you just can't reconcile with historically.
Yeah.
And people get to ask me the question all the time. So it's a growing process every day, and I think COVID didn't make it any easier, because I think I was working as an ICU nurse at the time. COVID was actually was impacting and became a pandemic globally, and I actually saw people at their weakest moments. And I think that actually changed the trajectory of my life and belief, and even made me more synced in what I believe. And I think I actually like the way you answered that last question, because I think it was one of the questions that actually said, this is one of the things that I'm actually going to ask Jackie today and see what her thoughts are about it. So thanks.
Can I invite you to a thought of something you've just shared there?
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things you said is, so if you actually look, there's a belief that you have. One of the hardest things is being a Christian and being Black. That's a belief that you have. When you infuse that with love, or when you work with spirit, you can convert that belief to the aspect of love, that's then not true. And what's so hard for us is, as human beings, and the way we've been brought up in body and mind, predominantly, as I say, be good academically or be good on the sports field, is how we lock down into a belief and then make it real, versus what if that belief is not true? And how do we then look for the alternatives? And there's a fabulous book that I can't think of the name of the author now. I think it's the 7, I'm going to send it to you, but somebody who also goes through that journey of being born Christian, examines every single other faith and goes back to Christianity. I'm very pro people actually working with the faith, as long as it is not, dogmatic and doesn't exclude. So whether it be Christianity or Judaism, or when you are working where everything else is acceptable and there's no resistance. And if we have time, I'd love to give an example. A dear friend of mine who lives in Florida, he has always been very involved in the church, and he went over to Israel and there's a site, I can't remember it offhand now, which is, now the Muslims, have ownership of the site, which apparently was originally a Christian heritage site. And he decided to go on a tour. and he was listening to this guy who was Muslim, and he was talking about it and why it's so important to their community and people, etc., etc. And he said, Jackie, did I not bring love forth? I didn't tell him in front of everyone that he was talking nonsense, that this is actually a Christian site and not important to their heritage. I took him aside afterwards and told him he was wrong. How could I have not brought love to that? I said, well, this is the other way. And I surrendered and I waited for the answer. And I said, the answer that's coming is that you could have said to him, thank you for sharing your time with me today, something that you're passionate about. You work at this place, this heritage site, and you talk about it every day to people who come. Can you tell me your story as to why it's so important to you and who told you? And does it come from your, from your religious leaders, or does it come from your parents? And just sit and listen to his story. And then ask him, after you've celebrated his story, if he can listen to yours and why this is important to you from a different point of view. And you probably would have just both said, oh, that's interesting at the end. So we often even lock our own belief down when we think that we're acting from a space of love. And for him, and he sat back and he looked at me, and he's an incredible Christian and he's very involved in the church in Florida, but he said that opening for him of what came to me to gift him was just a different way to look at the same situation. And that's really what it is. When we bring love to a situation, when we surrender to universal wisdom, we can find an alternative. And it wasn't about me being right, because it wasn't me that was giving the message. It was God. Just an alternative way. And it doesn't mean that's the only way. There's lots of ways. But can you infuse it with love and acceptance, full acceptance?
Thank you very much, Jackie. And I think we've just got a minute. I don't know if anybody else has any more questions, but I'll leave the floor open to you, Jackie. Just send us away with something beautiful.
Well, you know what I'm going to send you away with? 2 poems quickly, and they will take less than 30 seconds. So in part 2, where I'm struggling with suicide ideation again, I have a poem which I dedicate to my mother. No will to live, I do confess, a wish to die today. Lost in hell, I'm in distress. I cannot find a way. The screaming truth of this desire to end it all I see is in the shadow of myself, and not, in truth, me. And in that self, capital S, is in the shadow of my spirit, and not, in truth, me. And then for myself, for my spirit, my final poem. I wanted God to be external, as I wanted someone to name. I wanted God to be external, as I wanted someone to explain. I wanted God to be external, as I wanted someone to blame.
Well, thank you so much, Jackie. I don't think words would do me justice to actually tell you how grateful I am. And I believe the members of Osas Virtual Club too are as grateful as well for you coming today. You've had an amazing conversation with me on the side. Scheduling and arranging this meeting was easy with you because it was just like every single minute. You were very accepting of the things that we had and what we provided, and you gave insights where insights needed to be given, and helped me better transition certain areas, and that was very helpful for me. So it was good to know you. And
Well,
absolutely,
don't
I
anyone
will.
send me messages.
Yeah, I will stay in contact. And like I said to you already, we will be looking forward to your second book.
Thank
And
you so much.
we'll put our ears down when it comes out. And we would actually like to be one of the first people you would discuss it with. And let's try to
Thank you so
get
much.
in there. Would love to have you back again.
Thank you so much. And as I say, if anyone wants to send me a question, do that. Or if you want to come on the podcast and have some of these conversations, it'll be launching in a month, Finding Love in the Chaos of Life. And if you want to meet your spirit, go to my website, check it out. And please message me if you have any questions. Just send me a DM on Facebook or Instagram. And thank you all for being here tonight. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you very much,
you.
Jackie. And this video is going to be posted on our Facebook page, Jackie, if you don't mind. I don't think I asked you that question. Okay.
Yes,
Thank you very much. And thank you everyone else who attended today for coming in. And hope you all have a beautiful rest of the day.
Bye.